Virginia holds over 400 years of recorded history, battlefields where hundreds of thousands died, plantations where generations suffered in bondage, hospitals where soldiers screamed through the night, and in these places, something stayed behind. Footsteps in empty hallways, voices behind sealed doors, figures that vanish when approached. These are 10 of the most haunted places in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now let us begin. Number 10, we start along the western branch of the Lynnhaven River in Virginia Beach at a federal-style brick house surrounded by old magnolia trees. This is Ferry Plantation House. The site dates back to 1642 when Saville Gaskin started the second ferry service in Hampton Roads. A cannon was fired to signal the ferry across 11 stops on the river. Over the centuries, this land served as a ferry landing, a plantation, a courthouse, complete with stocks and pillory, a school, and a post office. For nearly 400 years, people have lived and worked and died on this same stretch of riverbank. The current house was built in 1830. Every brick came from the ruins of the Walke Mansion, which burned on September 12, 1828. The bricks carried the old house into the new one, and apparently they carried something else too. Ferry Plantation House is reportedly haunted by 11 distinct spirits, victims of an 1810 shipwreck at the ferry landing, a former enslaved person in the lower rooms, Sally Rebecca Walk, who planted a magnolia on April 6, 1863, in memory of her fiancé killed in the Civil War. That tree still stands in the backyard, its roots reaching deep into the same soil where the old courthouse once held trials. The lady in white who died falling down the stairs, the artist Thomas Williamson, seen painting at the top of the staircase, and throughout the house, the sound of chains dragging across the floor. One set of courthouse shackles is still bolted to a window frame. The house was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2005. Grace Sherwood, the last person tried for witchcraft in Virginia, was ducked in the river near this spot in 1706. The actual ducking took place about 200 yards out in the river from what is now a private home at the end of Witch Duck Road. A house haunted by 11 documented spirits is extraordinary. But travel to the south bank of the James River in Surry County and you will find a building even older, the oldest documented brick dwelling in America. Number 9, Bacon's Castle sits near the James River in Surry County, built in 1665 by Arthur Allen, a wealthy merchant and justice of the peace. Triple-stacked chimneys, Flemish gables, carved compass roses on the crossbeams. The only surviving high-style Carolean house in America, and one of only 3 such great houses west of the Atlantic. The other 2 are in Barbados, a National Historic Landmark since 1960. In September of Bacon's Rebellion, rebel followers seized the house and held it for over 3 months. Nathaniel Bacon himself never set foot inside. He died in October and the rebellion collapsed. Royal Governor William Berkeley began conquering the isolated posts one by one. On December 29th, Loyalist forces aboard a vessel called the Young Prince recaptured the fortified house. The name Bacon's Castle did not appear in print until 1769 in the Virginia Gazette. During the Civil War, the poet Sidney Lanier was stationed nearby and visited often. He fell in love with Virginia Hankins of the family who owned it. Her brother Captain James Hankins was killed in a duel on October 18, 1866, over insults exchanged in a tavern. The jury acquitted the killer despite dueling being outlawed since 1810. Virginia Hankins rejected Lanier's marriage proposal because she felt obligated to raise her motherless siblings. She never married. She died on December 24, 1888, and is buried in Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond. Preservation, Virginia, staff and visitors report apparitions in Civil War-era clothing on the upper floors. Doors open and close on their own. Cold spots settle where rebels once fortified their position. Multiple independent witnesses over decades have described a floating red ball of light in the stairwell. A house built in 1665, seized by rebels, scarred by duels and war, holds more history than most towns. But head into the mountains of southwestern Virginia and you will find a sanatorium where the suffering came from the torment of the mind itself. Number 8, in Radford, in the New River Valley, a large brick building sits on a hillside overlooking the surrounding countryside. This is St. Albans Sanatorium. Built in 1892 as a Lutheran boys' school, it later became a psychiatric facility where patients endured hydrotherapy, electroshock, and extended isolation in darkened rooms. Hundreds passed through those wards, many never left. The facility closed and the building deteriorated. Rain came through the collapsed roof. Walls cracked and plaster fell from the ceilings in sheets. Today, it is privately owned and operates as one of Virginia's most active paranormal investigation sites. Electronic voice phenomena have been captured by multiple independent teams. Shadow figures move through the former patient wards. Screaming comes from empty rooms on the upper floors. Investigators report being physically touched or pushed. Equipment malfunctions in the same locations every time. A young boy is frequently heard laughing and running through corridors where no child has played in decades. The most unsettling detail is that paranormal teams who have never communicated with one another consistently identify the exact same rooms as active. They arrive with no prior briefing, and they point to the same spots on the floor plan. A psychiatric hospital where strangers independently pinpoint the same rooms is deeply unsettling. But cross the Blue Ridge toward Charlottesville, and you will find an estate built as a monument to love, where that love refuses to leave. Number 7. Atop Afton Mountain near Waynesboro at roughly 2,500 feet sits Swannanoa Palace, a marble Italian Renaissance villa modeled after the Villa Medici in Rome, wildly out of place on a Virginia mountaintop overlooking the Rockfish Valley and the Piedmont stretching east toward Richmond. Major James H. Dooley, a Richmond railroad magnate, built it between 1912 and 1929 as a love letter to his wife, Sally May. 300 artisans worked on it: stained glass, Tiffany fixtures, a central staircase of Italian marble. After the Dooleys died, the estate changed hands and fell into decay. It served as a country club and later as a retreat for Walter Russell's University of Science and Philosophy. The roof collapsed. Water damaged the marble. Vandals stripped fixtures from the walls. The palace built for love began to crumble. But Sally Mae Dooley never left. A figure in white has been seen at the upper windows, gazing out over the valley. Visitors describe perfume drifting through empty rooms where no one has lived in decades. Piano music comes from a room where the grand piano has been gone for years. Cold drafts move through sealed corridors with no ventilation. Photographs taken inside show misty shapes near the staircase she once descended in evening gowns. A crumbling palace where perfume drifts through empty rooms is hauntingly beautiful. But travel east to Williamsburg and you will enter one of the most investigated haunted buildings in America, the home of a founding father. Number 6. At the corner of Nicholson and North England Streets in colonial Williamsburg stands the Peyton Randolph House. The oldest portion dates to 1715, National Historic Landmark 1970. Peyton Randolph was the first president of the Continental Congress, a founding father of the United States. The western half was built by William Robertson and purchased by Sir John Randolph in 1724. His son Peyton joined two separate structures together. During the Civil War, the Peachy family owned it, and it served as a hospital for soldiers wounded at the Battle of Williamsburg on May 5, 1862. In 1941, tunnel construction for the Colonial National Parkway disturbed at least 2 Native American burial sites beneath the East Wing. The original East Wing was in such poor condition it had to be torn down and reconstructed. Colonial Williamsburg staff have seen a figure in period clothing in the upstairs bedroom. Some identify the figure as Peyton Randolph himself. Guests on ghost tours describe cold spots and groaning from inside the walls. A wounded soldier has been seen in the hallway, likely from the hospital period. The house sits atop disturbed graves and is soaked in centuries of death. Visitors describe a pervasive dread in certain rooms they cannot explain. The home of the first president of the Continental Congress, built above disturbed graves and drenched in Civil War blood, carries centuries of restless energy. But drive south along the James River and you will reach one of the most elegant plantations in Virginia, where a portrait refuses to stay on the wall. Number 5. Shirley Plantation sits on the north bank of the James River in Charles City County. The oldest active plantation in Virginia, settled in 1613 by Sir Thomas West. The oldest family-owned business in North America. 8 generations of the Hill Carter family since 1638. The Great House was completed in 1738. Georgian red brick with white trim and a hipped roof topped by an upside-down pineapple on a white pedestal. Inside is the famous flying staircase, carved walnut, rising 3 stories with no visible support. The only one in America. Anne Hill Carter was born here and married Light Horse Harry Lee in the parlor on June 18, 1793. Their son was Robert E. Lee. The plantation used 70 to 90 enslaved people at any given time. National Historic Landmark, 1970. The most famous ghost story involves a portrait of Martha Hill, known as Aunt Pratt. When the family moved it from the 3rd floor, it rocked violently and fell repeatedly. They returned it to its original spot. It has hung quietly ever since. Rocking chairs move on their own on the porch. A woman hums in the upstairs rooms when no one is there. Staff hear footsteps on the flying staircase late at night when the house is locked and empty. A plantation where a portrait demands its place on the wall has a stubborn presence. But travel west to Gordonsville and you will find a building where over 70,000 wounded soldiers were carried through the doors, and some never left. Number 4. On South Main Street in Gordonsville stands the Exchange Hotel, a Greek Revival building constructed in 1860 by architect Benjamin Falconer for Richard Omohundro, built beside a critical railroad junction to serve passengers on the Virginia Central Railroad, listed on the National Register in 1973. In March of 1862, it became part of the Gordonsville Receiving Hospital. Over 23,000 wounded admitted in less than a year. They arrived by trainload from Cedar Mountain, Chancellorsville, the Wilderness, and Brandy Station. Both Union and Confederate soldiers were carried through those doors and laid on the floors and tables inside. 26 Union soldiers died in the building. By war's end, over 70,000 men had been treated. 700 were buried in the surrounding grounds. After the war, it served as a Freedmen's Bureau hospital for formerly enslaved people. It was restored as a museum in 1971 by Historic Gordonsville Incorporated. Staff and visitors report moaning from rooms empty for over 150 years. Soldiers in blue and gray walk the hallways and vanish at the end of the corridor. The smell of ether fills rooms where no medical equipment has existed since the 19th century. Doors slam on windless days, and one figure appears again and again, a nurse bending over an invisible patient in the upstairs ward, tending to wounds that have not bled for over a century and a half. A hotel where 70,000 wounded arrived by train and 700 were buried in the earth is permanently scarred. But head south to Richmond and you will find an old stone house connected to the man who wrote about death better than anyone in American history. Number 3. At 1914 East Main Street in Richmond's Shockoe Bottom stands the oldest residential structure in the city, built around 1740 by Jacob Eage, a German immigrant. Today, it is the Edgar Allan Poe Museum. Poe never lived here, but the museum sits blocks from where he lived, where he worked at the Southern Literary Messenger, and where his mother Eliza is buried at St. John's Church on Church Hill. In 1824, a 15-year-old Poe stood as honor guard outside this building when Lafayette visited Richmond. The museum holds one of the world's largest Poe collections, an 1845 Raven, one of 12 surviving copies of Tamerlane and other poems, his childhood bed, his sister Rosalie's piano. 26 published theories about his death are displayed in the North Building. The museum postulates that the 19th century practice of cooping may have contributed to his death. Vincent Price visited in 1975 and posed with the museum's stuffed raven. Behind the museum is the enchanted garden inspired by his poem To One in Paradise, a fountain, a shrine, and gardens planted with references to his writing. Two black cats named Edgar and Pluto live at the museum. They were found as stray kittens behind the shrine. Staff say they react to presences no one else can see, hissing at empty corners, staring at doorways where no one stands. Books fall off shelves. The scent of old tobacco drifts through galleries. Visitors feel watched intensely in the room containing Poe's vest, his walking stick, and a lock of his hair. A museum dedicated to the master of American horror, where even the cats sense presences feels almost inevitable. But our next destination is not a museum, it is a tunnel beneath the streets of Richmond, and what happened there in 1925 has haunted the city ever since. Number 2. Beneath Church Hill, one of Richmond's oldest neighborhoods, a railway tunnel stretches 4,000 feet under Jefferson Park. Built between 1871 and 1875 by the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, trains ran through it for decades. On October 2, 1925, a work crew of roughly 200 was inside conducting maintenance. The earth above them gave way. The tunnel collapsed. A 10-wheel steam locomotive was buried under tons of soil and debris. The engineer Tom Mason was trapped in the cab. The fireman Ben Mosby crawled out with severe burns but survived. Mason's body was never recovered. At least 2 to 4 additional workers remain entombed. The exact death toll has never been confirmed. Rather than attempt a full excavation, the city sealed both entrances with concrete. The locomotive and its crew are still inside, 100 years later, beneath a neighborhood where families eat dinner and children play in the yards above. Residents report vibrations and rumbling with no seismic explanation, as if a train is still running beneath their floorboards. A steam whistle heard at night near the sealed entrance. Figures covered in soot near the old portals. Construction workers on nearby projects report tools vanishing and an oppressive sense of being watched. A persistent legend tells of a blood-covered figure emerging after the collapse. Witnesses called it a vampire. It fled to Hollywood Cemetery and hid inside a mausoleum. It was almost certainly an injured survivor. But the legend of the Richmond vampire has never died. A sealed tunnel with a locomotive and crew entombed for 100 years refuses to be forgotten. But our final destination surpasses even this. It is a battlefield, the ground where more Americans fell than in almost any encounter of the entire Civil War. Number 1. Between Fredericksburg and Cold Harbor stretches 50 miles of Virginia countryside across Spotsylvania, Orange, and Hanover counties. The National Park Service maintains over 8,000 acres. It is some of the most blood-soaked ground in the Western Hemisphere. 4 major battles within miles of Fredericksburg between 1862 and 1864. Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, the Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse. Combined casualties exceeded 100,000 men. At Cold Harbor, on June 3, 1864, 7,000 Union soldiers fell in less than 30 minutes. The night before, soldiers wrote their names on slips of paper and pinned them to their uniforms so their bodies could be identified. They sealed letters to wives and mothers and children they would never see again. They cleaned their rifles. In the morning, they walked into a wall of Confederate fire, and most never came back. During the Battle of the Wilderness, the dense forest caught fire from artillery and musket discharge. Wounded soldiers lying on the ground who could not move burned alive in the underbrush. The screams carried for miles through the Virginia woods. Men who survived wrote in their diaries that the sound was the worst thing they ever heard in their lives. Bones surfaced in farm fields for decades afterward. farmers plowing their land turned up buttons, belt buckles, and human remains with every pass of the blade. Park rangers and visitors today report the smell of gunpowder on still days with no explanation. Distant drum rolls and fife music drifting across open ground. Soldiers in formation walking through the tree line and vanishing before they reach the clearing. At the sunken road in Fredericksburg, commands are shouted from positions empty for over 160 years. Photographs at dusk show mist formations shaped like human figures standing where battle lines once held. But it is Cold Harbor that produces the most disturbing reports. Visitors who know nothing of the history walk onto that field and break down weeping. They cannot explain why. An overwhelming sadness rises from the ground itself and passes through them like a current. National Park Service employees have gone on record describing experiences they cannot explain. 7,000 men fell here in under 30 minutes. They had pinned their names to their chests the night before because they already knew. And the ground where they fell has never been silent since.